Charles Proteus Steinmetz, the gifted genius that perfected Tesla's AC motor, once remarked that the AC generator was churning the ether to create electricity. Maybe the universe is far more simple than we have imagined. Kenneth Wheeler, a student of Tesla, Heaviside, and Steinmetz, recently proposed that the universe is only one field, that is expressed in only two modalities, electromagnetism and magnetism. Ken introduces the terms space and counterspace, pressure and counterpressure, and a dielectric vacuum field as the source of all phenomena in this universe to explain his discovery. It's hard to wrap your arms around this idea because of how these forces are currently described. His idea has been a splinter in my mind, like an itch you can't scratch from the moment I first heard of Ken Wheeler. This discovery is so annoying because the geometric shapes and force vectors you have to construct in your mind to see magnetism for what it is makes his discovery a revelation that can't be attained without it. And when it hits you, you start seeing things you thought you understood in brand new ways. He's the first person to figure this out. Let's look at his idea. There's much to like about it. We have been fascinated by magnets and magnetic materials for centuries and marveled at the invisible forces surrounding magnets. But magnetic fields in light are perturbed circuits in and out of the dielectric vacuum. Like ice floating in water, ice is a perturbation of water. But let's start this talk with electromagnetic radiation, light. I can show that light is not a particle, and it's not a wave. A wave is the expression of energy moving through a medium, like ocean water. Energy perturbs ocean water to move it up and down, not laterally. Yet the energy moving through the ocean can be caught and enjoyed on a surfboard. So what is light? I think of light now as a pulse of expansion and contraction. I think it's more important to understand why it pulses than to know its pulse length. The why is simply that the dielectric field is contractive and the magnetic field is expansive. Well, maybe not so simply. Light is a coaxially opposed pulse of perpendicularly aligned, alternating magnetic and electric oscillations in and out of the dielectric vacuum field in Planck time, in a vacuum, the smallest unit of time that has any meaning. Planck length is one pulse. It's determined by the distance light travels in one wavelength at the propagation rate, 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. But light has no speed. It is proven to have a rate of induction, however, according to its frequency, and when it interacts with the capacitance or resistance of mediums that get in its way. Light slows down as it traverses the layers of atoms in glass. And this is the reason why light is not matter. Because after light passes through glass, water, or in fact any medium, light returns to its original rate of propagation, and that violates the law of the conservation of energy and matter, so light cannot be matter. And this is how not imagining these shapes and force vectors in your mind first won't let you see another deeper truth like this. Ken Wheeler, Nikola, and Proteus rightly point out light would never travel in a straight line. There are no straight lines in nature. Instead of a linear coaxial oscillation of the electric and magnetic energy, envision light as a concept, a word, that in fact describes a perturbation of the electric vacuum inertial field as a corkscrew spiral of pulsing energy, and what is more intriguing, the same spiral describing light as this representation of a moving locus of the changing inertial intersection of expanding and contracting pulses of psi and phi. This is identical to the way a force vector is moving as a processing elliptical spiral in a toroid. As the loss of inertia expansion away from a moving dielectric energy locus and the contraction back towards it with no friction as a moving locus of the changing inertial intersection of expanding and contracting pulses of psi and phi over Planck time, and as such over eternity. If you couldn't envision this, you might never connect that magnetism is light and that light is magnetism. The only difference is their energy locus, and yet both are still merely different modalities of the same single dielectric energy field. And then the old ways of looking at the world begin to become almost transparent. Light bulbs can't spray out photon particles. Light bulbs are examples of resistance and capacitance imbalances. Electromagnetic energy is causing the tungsten filament having a resistance to electrical flow. Resistance of the tungsten under current causes friction. Infrared electromagnetic radiation first is the radiative translation of friction. The higher the current, the higher the friction. The higher the friction, the brighter the radiation. Then, correctly, grammatically, Electricity cannot be a thing. You are led to side with Steinmetz and agree that electricity is the combination of the dielectric and magnetic and is a magnetodynamic radiation. Electricity is a word to describe a relationship, not a thing. Electrons don't spray out of a copper cable. Rather, magnetodynamic radiation is propagated along transmission wires by a stimulation back at the AC generator station, churning the ether to create electricity. Electricity is actually a dielectric and magnetic perturbation along the copper wires that is delivered to your toaster to create heat by resistance, created by its heating strips. If light is oscillations of dielectric and magnetic perturbations of the cosmic void, what is magnetism? Is it some other form of the same energy seen in light translated into a field array by a different locus? To fully understand magnetism, you have to understand a new concept: counterspace. What is counterspace? If we accept the postulation by Dr. Archibald Wheeler and Dr. Richard Feynman that the foundation of the universe is a dielectric vacuum plenum of energy at 10 to the 95th power, we are unavoidably led to an understanding of counterspace. Counterspace is the vast medium of unexpressed inertial force where we and all the stars in the galaxies are. In this idea, force in motion is the loss of inertia from this dielectric vacuum field, and the magnitude and volume of the visible universe is manifested as perturbations of that energy field. No particles, no dark matter is involved at all, only force in motion. Energy is lost from the dielectric field to express magnitude, like a nuclear explosion resulting in the spatial volume of the huge cloud created from a small ball of plutonium. In the same way, the loss of inertia from the dielectric field creates a magnetic spatial volume. The plutonium held the inertial energy, creating the combustion volume in airspace. Counterspace is the dielectric field holding inertial energy that creates the magnetic volume in the dielectric space. And that's fine, but what is space? Let me say this a different way. There is a medium of unexpressed inertia, a dielectric vacuum field, a counterspace, a plenum of inertial energy. Instead of the eruptions of a quantum foam of not physically existing virtual particles, there is only the loss of inertia from the counterspace as force in motion that creates a perturbation, a spatial volume, within the dielectric medium. In this terminology, space is not a place, it's not a thing, it has no properties, only characteristic attributes. It is rather a region of perturbation within the counterspace dielectric field of inertia manifested from a loss of inertia from that field to expand a force in motion as a field region, a volume in the void with attributes. You cannot see a magnetic field or the dielectric field. Is this just a coincidence? In this theory, the space counterspace paradigm, a magnetic field is an expression of the dielectric vacuum field that exhibits volume and magnitude. Everything in the visual universe must therefore be magnetic, and atoms in a coherent array can provide a capacity to exhibit magnetism on a macro scale. I will explain this seemingly sweeping oversimplification. Let's examine magnetism in magnets. It's pretty easy to understand with an example, the scrapyard electromagnet. Why can't it pick up a car? The electricity, the huge current delivered to a large iron disk, dumps all the electricity back into the dielectric field of the atoms of the non-magnetic disk, and only magnetism is left, creating a huge magnetic field. The acceleration of the dielectric component back into the dielectric field builds a very strong magnetic field in the non-magnetic iron disk based on the high voltage induced. Permanent rare earth magnets require charging by reverse magnetic field pulsing in a magnetizer to adjust field strength. The field expands because the dielectric charging perturbs the dielectric field, resulting in a related level of expanded magnetic volume. After pulsing, it exhibits a field of force outside and surrounding it that can be described with certainty. A self-reciprocating precessional hyperboloid field architecture with field polarity, discharging and charging, and an eternal energy balance. The material comprising the magnets didn't change. What changed was a realignment of the materials that opens a circuit in the dielectric field to release and recapture inertia. Magnetic fields cannot exist without counterspace. It requires a dielectric anchor. The magnetic field, because it is not constructed of matter, makes it the perfect perpetual motion device. The poles cannot be dissected from a magnet to isolate a magnetic north or south pole. In fact, if you slice a magnet like a salami, each slice will exhibit the same force in motion because there are no poles. Poles are only the inverse of force vectors, not things. But there is a coherent non-point specific field incommensurability by the atoms of the material that now uniformly promotes magnetism that was not there before it was magnetized. It's as if all the materials of the magnet are contributing to the dielectric region that is expressing force and motion and inertial acceleration. When coherently aligned atoms release force and motion from their combined dielectric plane of inertia, they manifest an immutable, coherent, non-point specific force vector field, commonly referred to as a magnetic field, supported by every part of the magnetic material, a strong plane of inertia, and an expanded magnetic region. You can see this in a magnetic viewing material. In support of this theory, there is evidence in the interference X-ray diffraction imaging of cuprite by Arizona State University in 1999. The magnetic field of the copper atom is being produced by the dielectric plane of inertia in the atomic nuclei at the center of the magnetic field, creating a magnetic volume along the field axis, incorrectly described as electron orbitals. Atoms are mostly space as we correctly have determined, but it's magnetic spatial volume. Light is bent by magnets. That's how the old tube TVs worked. New theory, no electron orbitals, only complex lobed magnetic fields due to precession in a rapidly spinning magnet that can indeed deflect X-ray specific angles unique to individual atoms and their isotopes and produce the spectral lines of emission and absorption from their combined magnetic fields. In fact, the magnetic perturbation of the dielectric field is an example of the conjugated geometry of this entire universe, an immutable principle of expanding force in motion and contracting inertia and acceleration. These conjugated expressions create the self-reciprocating precessional hyperboloid field architecture of the magnetic field, and in fact all the visible universe, from the atomic to the galactic. To really understand these forces, you have to imagine the combined overlapping mirror images of the toroidal, the geometry of force and motion, the release of inertia, magnetism, centrifugal divergence, and the hyperboloidal, the geometry of increasing inertia, centripetal convergence, acceleration toward the dielectric. A donut shape with an hourglass shape pass through the middle. The unique attributes that are often described as attraction and repulsion are never explained correctly as pressure and counterpressure to and from the plane of inertia. Unless you can envision this, you can't understand this theory because you have to envision counter-spinning, interlaced, inverted funnels of inertia in the center of a toroid, with the loss of inertia back into the torus and return of inertia down the funnels of the hourglass as an energy circuit in the electric vacuum to create a magnetic volume. I dare you to try. And this last bit, pressure and counterpressure, is evident in the expressed forces. Have you ever tried to push two like poles of a magnet together? This theory dictates that it cannot be repulsion. It is in fact the pressure of opposed inertial force released from the dielectric plane of inertia of each magnet against the other. You are actually feeling the outward flow of force of inertia lost from the dielectric vacuum field. And when you push like poles together hereafter, you will never view this phenomena in any other way. You are actually feeling the invisible force of the dielectric vacuum. The self-reciprocating precessional hyperboloid field architecture of a magnet is actually two identical fields existing in the same space, conjugated as reciprocating flows of inertial force into and out of the dielectric field, processing in opposite directions. This conjugated phenomena causes pressure toward the dielectric plane of inertia and pressure away from the dielectric plane of inertia. The impression of attraction is merely matching the inward and outward flow polarities, as the outward pressure of one is being accelerated back toward the dielectric counterpressure of the other, and the impression of repulsion is the outer pressures against each other. So what is the physical universe? The physical universe can only be the expression of magnetism because it exhibits the attribute of magnitude and volume. The force vector in a magnetic field is three-dimensional because of precession from a plane of inertia that, directed out of it, creates a toroidal geometry. The magnitude of the field is expressed in pressures, and the dielectric counterspace exhibits counterpressure toward the plane of inertia. Everything in nature is force and motion, inertia and acceleration, capacitance and resistance, permeability and permittivity, the release of energy or the return of energy. The geometry is always tethered in counter space. Simply, light is a perturbation of the dielectric vacuum field like magnetism, and everything in the universe, no matter how simple or complex, is a perturbation of the dielectric field. Like ice cubes floating in water, both are water. So where are we and what are we? The universe may only be the dielectric vacuum field, and we and everything we experience are merely the illusions of the electromagnetic and magnetic field perturbations. So be it. We live out our brief lives in an invisible plenum, pervasive in all places and all size frames, and its perturbations create the myriad illusions we enjoy with our senses. Remarkably, however, we are therefore everything and we are nothing. We are just fleeting perturbations of the vacuum field. I know that probably doesn't give you a warm, fuzzy feeling deep inside, but sometimes the truth is like that.